This is a unit of biology praxis prep focusing on ecosystems. In the unit, we'll start with an Ecology Ecosystems summary, and we'll follow that up with some practice questions that are similar to what you might see on your biology praxis exam. Ecology Ecosystems. Community interactions. Each population lives in a particular habitat in the ecosystem and occupies a specific niche, which includes all aspects of an organism's life, such as the type of food it eats, when and how it obtains that food, where it lives in the habitat, and how it reproduces. Populations in ecosystems often have overlapping needs. Perhaps they eat the same food or use the same type of shelter. Competition results when there are more organisms than resources. Interspecific competition occurs between members of different species, and intraspecific competition occurs between members of the same species. Predator-prey interactions occur when one species eats another species to obtain energy and nutrients. This type of interaction mostly occurs between animals. The hunting species is called the predator, while the species being hunted is the prey. Symbiosis. Symbiosis is the interaction of different species and can occur in three ways. Mutualism is when both species benefit from their close association. It is mutually beneficial. Commensalism is when one species benefits from their close association and the other is unharmed. Parasitism is when one species benefits from their close association and the other is harmed. The species that benefits is called a parasite. Obligate mutualism. Some mutually beneficial relationships are necessary for both species to survive. This is called obligate mutualism. The yucca tree, for example, is only pollinated by the yucca moth. The yucca moth lays eggs inside the flower, and the developing insects can only eat parts of the flower. Neither species would survive without the other. Tolerance and adaptation. Tolerance is the ability of an organism to withstand stress from abiotic factors, such as temperature, salinity, oxygen levels, etc. For each factor, an organism has a tolerance range, which is the minimum and maximum levels of that factor it can withstand. The range depends on the organism's environment and how much variability it has for a factor. Behavior. Animals often use cues such as differences in day length to keep track of cyclical environmental changes, such as the arrival of winter season. Shorter days trigger changes in behavior. Hibernation. Certain animals avoid cold temperatures by entering a dormant state. Their body temperature lowers and their heart rate and breathing slows down. Migration. Groups of animals, ducks and geese, will travel closer to the equator during the winter season. As with hibernation, migration allows animals to avoid harsh conditions. Canadian geese spend the winter in the southern United States and Mexico, as an example. The most important benefits of a behavior include increased survivorship and reproduction rates. Survivorship refers to the number of individuals that survive from one year to the next. Parental investment. Reproduction is the production of offspring. There are two main forms, sexual and asexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, an organism combines the genetic information from each of its parents and is genetically unique. In asexual reproduction, one parent copies itself to form a genetically identical offspring. Sea turtles are an example of an animal that reproduces sexually. A volvox, green algae, is an example of an organism that reproduces asexually. And a brittle star can reproduce in either way. Parental investment is the investment in offspring by the parent that increases the offspring's chance of surviving and hence reproductive success at the expense of the parent's ability to invest in other offspring. There are both advantages and disadvantages to sexual and asexual reproduction. These costs and benefits can affect individuals as well as populations. Sexual reproduction has a high degree of genetic variability, facilitates adaptation, and speeds up evolution. But that comes with some disadvantages. There's high energy costs. Courtship for a mate is time and resource consuming, and it usually sacrifices the fitness of one sex to the other. Asexual reproduction saves on energy, there's no courtship, and there's the greatest increase in fitness for each individual, while at the same time, that means low genetic variability, adaptation to the environment can be difficult, and it slows the evolution process. Reproduction strategies. The term reproductive strategy is loosely used to refer to the way an animal mates and/or raises offspring. This not only refers to sexual versus asexual reproduction, it could also refer to the number of offspring and parental interactions. Our strategists are organisms that reproduce very quickly, usually have lots of offspring all at once, and don't invest much, if any, time in protecting and/or raising their offspring. This can include fish, insects, and bacteria. Few of the offspring have a chance of reaching adulthood. K strategists are organisms that have few offspring at a time and invest a lot of energy on protecting and raising a fully functional adult. They have a higher chance of passing on one's genes successfully, but there are fewer offspring in which they get the chance to do so. This strategy is seen among many mammals like elephants and humans. R strategists and K strategists follow different population growth patterns as well as survivorships. So here's the growth in population curve. In red are R strategists. You can see increase, decrease, increase, decrease, increase, decrease, the cyclical thing happening. And then the K strategists, you can see this increase until the population reaches carrying capacity. And then we hover right around that carrying capacity. And then survivorship. Here's the number of survivors versus the percentage of maximum lifespan. You can see the type 1 here, like humans, the K strategists, have a much longer or much higher percentage of the population of maximum lifespan versus the R strategists, right? So we've talked about how with less parental investment, the ability for these R strategists to live to adulthood is much less. Helpful social behaviors. Cooperation involves behaviors that improve the survival and reproduction of both individuals. Lioness sharing their prey with the pride even though only one of them killed it. Reciprocity involves behaviors in which individuals help other group members with the expectation that they will be helped in return. Altruism is the kind of behavior in which an animal appears to sacrifice itself for the good of the group. Worker honeybees exhibit altruism, meaning they perform selfless actions that benefit another while decreasing their own fitness by means of dividing labor and not reproducing. Limiting factors are abiotic or biotic factors that limit a population to a particular size in an ecosystem. The population size that can be reached in the presence of limiting factors is the carrying capacity. A species that is introduced to a new area where there is no limiting factors, is called an invasive species, as it is not naturally a part of the ecosystem and can cause great damage. So let's look at this ecosystem we have here with this small little food chain where we have a producer, the tussock grass, primary consumer, grasshopper, secondary consumer, dragonfly, and then the tertiary consumer, the quoll. So the fox is introduced as an invasive species and shares a similar but wider diet to this quoll, which is endemic to the ecosystem. This added predation places an increased pressure on the survival of native insect species, the grasshopper and the dragonfly. So the fox is also a consumer of these. So as both are consuming, we're going to have pressure on this population. The quoll and fox both have a similar niche. However, as a result of competition between the two species, the quoll's realized niche is shrinking. This means the quoll population numbers are in decline. Populations and ecosystems are dependent on resources, community interactions, and the environment. Exponential population growth means that there are unlimited resources and more births than deaths. Logistic population growth is when a population levels off at a carrying capacity. Ecological succession. Change is inevitable within communities. Older members die, new organisms immigrate, and sudden disturbances force change. Ecological succession is the term used to describe the series of expected changes that occur within a community over time. Primary succession refers to the founding of new communities in environments that initially had no living organisms. In primary ecological succession, the first organisms to populate an uninhabited environment are called the pioneer species. Lichen are often pioneer species growing on bare rocks. So we have bare rocks, and we get this pioneer species of lichens and moss, followed by grasses and small plants, small shrubs, and then climax communities develop on mature soils. After ecosystems are dramatically altered by fires, floods, disease, or human activity, community interactions often restore ecosystems to their original condition. The reestablishment of climax communities in an ecosystem is called secondary succession. Climax communities are the organisms that remain stable in an ecosystem over time. So here we go in step 1. The ground is cleared of existing community to grow a single crop. Then the ground is abandoned and new species begin to grow. Small shrubs again colonize and a new climax community forms. Disturbances caused by humans. Overhunting and overfishing are human-caused disturbances. Other human-caused disturbances which lead to habitat destruction include deforestation, unsustainable farming, industrialization, development of cities and suburbs, burning of fossil fuels, disruptive mining, water and air pollution, and introduction of invasive species to new environments. Human impacts have affected every ecosystem on the planet, either directly or indirectly. In some instances, these disruptions have led to fragmentation of ecosystems, which happens when parts of a habitat are destroyed, leaving behind smaller, unconnected areas. The greenhouse effect. The sun warms the earth via visible and ultraviolet light that passes through the atmosphere. The earth's surface warms and emits infrared light. Atmospheric gases like carbon dioxide, water vapor, and methane absorb infrared that would otherwise carry heat away from Earth into space, cooling Earth. Without these greenhouse gases, Earth would freeze. With too many of the gases, Earth would get too hot. Burning fossil fuels such as coal, natural gas, and oil emits excessive greenhouse gases that contribute to the warming of Earth and global climate change. While we should simply stop burning fossil fuels, Doing so without first putting alternatives in place would damage transportation systems, food supplies, and the heating and cooling of homes. Alternative energy sources like hydropower, wind power, solar energy, and nuclear power are available, each with their own benefits, costs, and impacts on the environment that need to be examined. Hydropower, wind power, and solar energy have the benefit of being renewable resources. Acid rain comes in many forms: rain, snow, sleet, hail, and fog, or wet deposition, and as acid particles, aerosols, and gases, dry deposition. Acid deposition forms when sulfur dioxide, SO2, and nitrogen oxides combine with moisture in the atmosphere to produce sulfuric acid and nitric acid. Transport of materials by humans. Sometimes connections among ecosystems have negative consequences. For example, humans export a lot of materials from our ecosystems. Humans mine and drill resources from one area and ship them out to others. The cars and planes used for transportation have far-reaching consequences for other ecosystems because they export pollutants to the atmosphere that may later enter other ecosystems. For example, each year of fossil fuel burning adds about 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. A great deal of trash generated by humans is sometimes stored far beyond the town or city ecosystems it came from. In the USA, each person produces on average 4.6 pounds of trash per day. Ecosystem resiliency. Some ecosystems are very resilient and can bounce back from disturbances over relatively short periods of time. Forest fires and secondary succession that follows a fire are often healthy disturbances that benefit the ecosystem in a positive way. So you can see the destruction via the forest fire, and then over a number of years, the repopulation of that ecosystem. Do ecosystems recover after disturbances? If the disturbance comes and goes, the ecosystem is more likely to recover than if the disturbance, like an invasive species, stays. Fishing with lines and hooks in a lake twice per year will not destroy the lake ecosystem. Fishing with nets in a lake every day will probably destroy the lake ecosystem. Healthy ecosystems absorb small or infrequent disturbances, but will change or collapse if the environment changes drastically. Biodiversity. It is easier for an ecosystem to recover if it has a greater number of different types of organisms, a greater biodiversity. Picture A has more diversity than B and can recover from disturbances better. Disturbance remediation. Human activities can disturb an ecosystem in ways that reduce biodiversity. Fortunately, humans have the ability to remedy the ecosystem disturbances that they create, but it's not always simple. Done poorly, remediation can cost excessive money and negatively impact people's lives. Remediation must be based on science and planned carefully to achieve the most positive outcomes with the least negative impacts on the economy and society.